After 25 years in power, it seems like President Vladimir Putin's reign of terror is coming to an end. We've been hearing rumors of a coup ever since Putin launched his senseless invasion. Then we saw a convoy of Wagner mercenaries heading towards Moscow to take care of Putin. They were cheered on and greeted by Russians who were lining up on the side of the road to see history play out in front of their eyes. But Putin survived. That was for one reason and one reason only. Leaders inside Moscow supported him, but it seems that support is now waning. You see, 12 Russian politicians, 12 senators in Russia just did something that shows they're not afraid of falling out of a building in Moscow. They sent a signed letter to Putin warning him that if he does not end this war, Russia will collapse. The reason behind their warning was simple. According to the letter, there are 10 different economic warning signs in Russia, and they're all related to sanctions. That's why they are urging Putin to accept US peace proposal and in return ask for sanctions relief. On a side note, if anyone is looking for a job, 12 new positions have opened up in Kremlin. But anyways, I'll get to the 10 economic warnings that were mentioned in the letter in just a second. Before that, I quickly want to show you guys this clip from General Kellogg's explaining why Russia is losing. And the reason I want to show you this clip is because it's going viral in Russia. So let's listen to it.
If Putin thinks Russia is winning, his definition of winning and my definition of winning are absolutely two different things. If he was winning, he'd be in Kiev. If he was winning, he'd be west of the Dnieper River. If he was winning, he'd be in Odessa. If he was winning, he would have changed the government. Russia is, in fact, losing this war. Now, they may make movements and say, so, well, they're advancing in the Donbass region and the Donetsk. But if you consider advancing moving by meters, not miles, well, then, okay, that's successful. But at the cost they're having, it's enormous. And I don't think people truly appreciate it. It's a number. But the numbers they have lost, when you're talking dead and wounded, well over 1 million, they left Afghanistan after losing 18,000. We left Vietnam after losing 65,000. They've lost over 1 million dead or wounded. These numbers are World War II level numbers when you think about it. They're stunning in the loss. And this is in their first line units that they came and tried to take Kyiv with a little over four years ago. Those first line units are gone. So they've gone through a second or a third or fourth iteration of wartime commanders. They're pulling tanks out of mothballs, out of museums, to put on the battle line. They can't operate in large movements because the Ukrainians will kill them. And the Ukrainians are fighting valiantly on there. And so do I think the Russians are winning? Putin says it, and I think the West just needs to push back and say, no, you're not. And I actually, it's a great question because I was actually asked this question by the President Trump, in the Oval Office, probably 6 weeks ago. Same question, and I responded quite forcefully. And I finally said, Mr. President, don't just listen to me. Your chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Dan Kane, is outside. He's out in the outer world. Bring him in. Ask him that question. He's your principal military advisor. And he did. And Dan said the same thing. They went, nope.
You see, it's not just General Kellogg. Many different people are arriving at the same conclusion, including the 12 senators from Russia that we talked about at the start of the video. So let's now get to the letter that these senators signed. Here's the letter on the screen, and here are 10 economic indicators that are worrying these senators. First one is one of the most important one, and it is that Russian businesses are cutting jobs and cutting pay. They're doing this in a very, very hidden way. You see, a lot of Russian businesses roughly a month ago cut their work week from 5 days to 4 days. Now, I know that sounds like a great thing, but at the end of the day, they did this because they could not afford to pay their employees. So instead of just laying off people or firing people to reduce their workforce, they just cut their work week so they don't have to pay them as much. This is basically like firing people or reducing their salaries, but doing it in a diplomatic way. Now, this is problematic because a lot of these people who are fired technically are dealing with inflation. The prices of necessity are going up in Russia, all the while the salaries for these people are falling. That's a very, very bad sign as to what's about to happen in that country. Now, they also cover other points that are very detailed, that are important, but they're just very, very detailed analytics, like the industrial capacity declining, investment not increasing in Russia. But the ninth one is the important one that I want to bring your guys' attention to. The ninth one is talking about declining GDP growth. You see, ever since Putin launched his invasion, he's been bragging about one thing, and that thing is that foreign sanctions are not really working on the Russian economy because you can see Russian economy growing. Now, this is where I will say something that I thought I would never say. Putin is right. Russian economy was growing. But this is where we have to look at closely at how that growth is coming about, because it's not happening because Russian consumers are spending more or Russian businesses are just investing a lot of money. The Russian GDP is growing because government is printing money and spending on defense contractors and spending on soldiers' pay. That's why the GDP is growing, but this is not a great way to grow the GDP for the long term. Just as Soviet Union. Well, guess what? The time has come and Russia is about to learn that you cannot print your way into prosperity. Otherwise, every country would be the richest country in the world. GDP growth is now slowing down, all the while Putin is spending more and more money on the military. Now, I doubt Putin is gonna be around to face the repercussions of his action. He is 72 after all. But it's gonna be the Russian youth and the Russian population that's left behind that's gonna struggle for decades to come. This reminds me of a famous quote I actually saw in the comments just a few days ago. A fool can throw a stone in the pond that 100 wise men cannot get out. This is the situation the future Russian leaders will have to deal with. It will not matter how smart they are because it's gonna be near impossible to dig out of a hole that Putin is putting them in right now. In fact, Putin himself is realizing that Russian economy is on brink of collapse and it cannot survive more sanctions. That's exactly why he's pretending to negotiate with President Trump to delay secondary sanctions as much as possible.
Він точно хоче. He definitely wants to trick the US. He's doing everything he can to avoid sanctions, to prevent US and Trump from putting sanctions on him. And if you keep postponing applying sanctions any further, then the Russians will be better prepared.
So, what do you do when things are horrible at home? Well, this is Dictator 101. You create an enemy outside and you point fingers at that enemy. The problem is, Putin has been doing this for years now, so now he has to get creative with finding new enemies. Well, it seems the new Russian enemy seems to be General Kellogg, because he's telling the truth that the Russian army is not really advancing unless you count the meters that they're gaining by sacrificing millions of Russians as advancing. The only problem with this definition of advancing is that it would take Russia more than 100 years to take over Ukraine. Well, Russian media did not like these truth bombs and they're now going after General Kellogg. This is what they had to say. Let's listen in because it's always satisfying when your enemies are just completely losing their mind.
By the way, Kellogg, Americans didn't take Berlin, but we did. What have you Americans taken in recent years besides your dirty Afghan diapers when you were fleeing Afghanistan? Where, when, and who have you ever defeated? You, Kellogg. In which war did you win? In which war did you, Kellogg, fight? When was it? And whom did you defeat? Why do you keep a chest full of orders? Why do you have your chest covered in medals? Is it for the mass murder of civilians? For killing civilians? Tons. So shut up. So shut your trap. You don't know anything about modern wars. And your negligent attitude towards Russian soldiers. Your contemptuous attitude towards the Russian soldiers is absolutely at odds with the position of the current administration. Absolutely out of line with the current position in administration. So we need to check. And it's necessary to check on what basis your daughter hasn't registered as a foreign agent, considering how much money she receives from Ukraine, considering how much money she gets from Ukraine.
So let's look at how Russian soldiers are doing on the front lines. And just to be fair to Russia, we'll actually use Russian sources. Russian war blogger Igor Grikin now admits that Russia is losing diplomatically, economically, and on the battlefield. Zapad 2025 is Putin's last bluff. What he cannot achieve on the battlefield, he's trying to fake on the training grounds. Russia is bogged down in Sumy pocket in northeastern Ukraine. A prominent Russian war blogger admits the two major channels report that situation is difficult due to Ukraine's large-scale drone attacks and calls out commanders for lying. Sumy direction, not everything is so easy. While the official department channels are forced to write on command of senior chiefs that creation of a security strip and the notorious buffer zone is underway, the situation remains difficult. To begin with, the buffer zone should reach a depth of several 10 kilometers because cheap enemy drones fly such distance and fly en masse. Not everything can be shot down. In the map above, the depth of the inclusion in the area of this reaches 14 kilometers in the best case. An enemy, albeit at the cost of heavy daily losses, is holding back our offensive. No one is lying about the control over Kridivka anymore, and as our commanders report, in Unikka, we are not yet talking about complete control of the southern part. Here we have another Russian war channel reporting a similar news. Another Russian channel admits the situation in Sumy is getting worse. It claims Oliskwa will be abandoned, comparing it to the previous where regiment were destroyed. Reinforcements from 30th Motor Rifle Regiment are described by an officer as pensioners, grunts, the unwanted. The channel warns the attempts to hold Oliska will only lead to heavy losses. What did General Kellogg said at the start? The elite forces of Russia died when they were trying to take Kyiv, and now Russia is backfilling those forces with just randoms off the street. These are poor people who don't have other economic opportunities in the country, so they're signing up for the army with the promise of tens of thousands of dollars in bonuses and $2,000 salary per month. That's 5 times what an average Russian salary is. At that point, you can see why Russia is able to throw so many people, but they are not competent people. Just hours before I was recording, President Trump said this, relaying the same message.
He's killing many people, and he's losing more people than he's killing. I mean, frankly, the Russian soldiers are being killed at a higher rate than the Ukrainian soldiers. But, yeah, he said, let me down. I don't like this.
And we see the same message coming out from other European leaders too. Next clip is President Stubbs of Finland. Let's listen in.
If you look at this thing from the perspective of Putin and the Kremlin, you have to ask yourself, how did I do? First, the aim was to take over Ukraine in a special operation in 4 days. Here we are, 4 years into the war. Second was to create disunity in the West. I've never seen it more united before, including actually the transatlantic partnership. Third was to minimize the defense expenditure of NATO members. Trump has just hiked us up from 2% to 5%. And the icing of the cake is, of course, that Putin doubled his border to NATO through Finland and then eventually Sweden. So he has failed in all of his strategic goals, including the fact that Ukraine became very European and not Russian at all. The situation on the ground is not as bad as people want to make it for Ukraine. Look at the process of advancement of Russia in the past 1,000 days. They have advanced 1 percentage point of Ukrainian territory. That's about 18 square kilometers a day at a cost of roughly 7,000 dead or wounded on the Russian side per week. The cost is humongous. And you have to ask yourself the question, how long can Russian society accept this?
YouTube just dropped a mind-boggling announcement. It is paying creators $64 million per day. Why? Well, because YouTube doesn't have enough creators. That is why you see videos on your homepage that have less than 1,000 views, like this one right here. Now, of course, this doesn't mean that everyone should start a channel. But if you have ever wondered about starting a YouTube channel or a faceless channel, now is a perfect time. YouTube is paying creators millions of dollars every single day, and it's pushing newer and smaller channels now more than ever. But I'm sure you have many questions on how to start and grow a channel. We get questions in our email all the time from some of you guys. That's why we decided to put all our YouTube advice into one YouTube video for completely free. So if you're someone interested in starting your own channel, you can watch that video here on YouTube by clicking the link in the description or card on your screen.